Did everybody have a safe 4th?
Well, mine was good. On 4th of July, a couple of friends and myself, I did a recitation for the missing man table. You're familiar with that? And then one of the towns just to the north of us, Kalama, they unveiled this huge eagle. I'll have to send you a picture of it. It is unbelievable. They had the sculptor. Are you familiar with Dolly Parton's place down there in Tennessee? What do they call it?
Dollywood.
Dollywood, yeah. They have a huge sculpture of an eagle down there.
Mhm.
And a friend of somebody from Kalama saw that, and they got a hold of the artist, and they had them make one for up here. So they unveiled this thing on 4th of July. It's huge. It's about 17 feet tall, and the wingspan is about 20, 25 feet. It's
Wow.
just unbelievable. So bronze and stainless steel and nickel, just beautiful. So they had this whole ceremony for the unveiling. And so it was kind of a patriotic thing about freedom. So I did the whole recitation thing for the missing man table, which just went over really well. My other friend did the keynote talk, and then the other one does a rendition of the America, and he did that, and it was just went over great. It was a few thousand people there at this thing, so it was really good.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
How did your speech go, Martin?
Well, my county chapter in Crawford County, we the people of Crawford County, organized a ceremony to read the Declaration of Independence on the courthouse steps in Crawford County, and I was one of the readers, and it went over really well. They had a pastor there that gave a great talk and a great prayer, as well as the reading of the Declaration. It was just a very neat little affair. There were a little fewer than a few thousand people there, but it was pretty nice.
Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together again and learn some really important history concerning areas of our country. And Father, that we may go forth from here with a greater understanding of what you have done here, and that we can be always thankful for what you do here in us and through us. In your wonderful Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you,
Proceed,
David.
Miss Erin.
I will do that.
On a hill by the harbor where the pilgrims stood, carved in the granite what they knew was good. Not kings, not crowns, not chains of gold, but truths worth more than riches untold. A Bible race toward heaven's light, pointing a nation to what is right. They didn't come for comfort or ease. They came for truth and liberty. A quiet whisper across the breeze. Faith is the cornerstone, strong and sure. Law stands guard so justice won't fall. Education lights the way for all. Liberty cries from the mountainside. We are people meant to rise from stone and flame. Their voices say, remember who you are today. Morality walks with a steady hand, teaching the heart how to take a stand. Law holds the scales and daylight clears, so power bows to what is fair. Education lifts a child's eyes to read the truth, to reason why. Not by force and not by fear, but by conscience bright and clear. A guiding star year after year. Faith is the cornerstone, strong and sure. Morality, the path that must endure. Law stands guard so justice won't fall. Education lights the way for all. Liberty cries from the mountainside. We are a people meant to rise from stone and flame. Their voices say, remember who you are today. 5 great pillars carved in time, not just statues but a design for every home and every land. A self-governed people, yard aims. Without faith the soul grows weak. Without truth the law can't speak. Without light the mind grows blind. Without virtue freedom dies. Faith, morality, law and education, liberty. These are the roots of a nation free, deep and true for all to see. Faith is the cornerstone lifted high. Morality keeps the flame alive. Law and learning walk as one, till justice and wisdom overcome. Liberty calls through ages long. Stand for right, be brave, be strong. From Plymouth Rock to every shore, we are the heirs of something more. Still the stone is standing tall. Still her message starts to call. Not just history, not just art, but a living fire within the heart. The stone still speaks. The stone still speaks.
Amen to that.
Well, it's sure nice to have all of our egg friends here this evening. Thank you for joining us. And we're so happy to have you here on this Wednesday, July 8th, 2026. And we've got a really good, interesting program tonight. Before we get started, though, just a couple of quick things. We do have a Q&A at the end of the program. And if you have any questions, comments that you'd like to share at the end of the program, down at the bottom of your screen, you'll find your tools down there. You'll see the React button, and you hit that React button. You should be able to put your hand up with that React button. And also the chat button down there. We encourage everybody to use that chat. Any questions, comments as we're going along with the program, please put it there. If you have any really good questions, we will pull those out and share them at the end of the program during the Q&A. So thank you, everybody. And on that note, did I forget anything, Martin?
No, I don't think so. Go ahead with the
All right.
announcements.
Okay, well then let's get started with our announcements. The egg. We're so glad to have you here in the egg, and you can follow us on Facebook Live, and you can also catch us on Rumble. The egg is here every Wednesday, and you can find us at YouTube at the egg or on Rumble. Catch us every Wednesday evening at 8:30 Eastern Time. And the egg now has a phone number that you can call. You can leave us a message. You can ask to be put on our text list, or you can just share some information that you might have, just to call or talk to us. We'll be sharing that number in the chat throughout the presentation tonight. The first week of our Stepping into the Constitution is with Michael Gordon. And every week we have a different egg program, and Learning the Constitution so we can enforce it with Michael Gordon is a very good program. Please don't miss that one. The second Wednesday of the month is of historical importance with Martin Holtz, teaching what history class didn't. Third Wednesday of the month is America's Foundation with myself, the Forefathers Monument. We're restoring America as the land of liberty, and you won't want to miss next week's program. And the fourth Wednesday of the month is Patrick Locke with Pathway to the Forefathers Monument, another very good program. It's for deep thinkers, folks. Every week we have a book study, and Monday mornings, Don Betha has The People Themselves, Larry Kramer's book. You can catch her at zoomtc.don.com at 9 a.m. Eastern. On Tuesdays, Stacey Marizek has the Tactical Civics Ready Constitution. Catch her at 6:30 p.m. every Wednesday evening, just before our program begins. Now, when we rise on Thursday evenings at zoomflorida.com with Ed Gonzalez, that's at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. On Friday evenings, we have Grand Jury Awake with Rich Anderson and zoomalaskatc.com. Catch that at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And The Banished Bureaucrat with David Coffey, Friday evenings at 6:30 p.m. at zoomtcgeorgia.com. We also have Liberty Lab every Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Catch that at zoomlibertylab.com. Also, Undoctrinated Friday evenings with Garfield Green Catch him on Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. Please don't miss it every Friday evenings at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We also have Zoom Thank Praise on Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Please go to our training center at the Tactical Civics Training Center member events for times and locations. Also, every Sunday night, the Cave of Adullam with David Zuniga. That's at zoomcaveofadullam.com at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Always join that program. It's always a good time for fellowship every Sunday night. We also have our Project America 125 every Monday evening. Getting together locally, the restoration has begun. Please join us every Monday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And introducing our Plymouth Gala and our Freedom Fest, our Tactical Civics sponsored galas that we have. The Plymouth Gala will be going on September 18th and 19th. Leo Martin of the Jenny will be a guest speaker. And the Freedom Fest will be going on September 18th and 19th as well, with a guest speaker, Bradley Dean. That ought to be very interesting as well. Please go to the Tactical Civics Training Center to learn more about these two galas that are be going on. The mission of Tactical Civics is to glorify Jesus Christ and maintain our civilization by living like responsible adults, enforcing what we stipulate in our Constitution. Please go to tacticalcivics.com. And introducing the Commons. You can find the Commons on Facebook. And in the Commons, we have all kinds of things that you can choose from. We have Undoctrinated. We have The Cave. We have Now When We Ride series, Project America 125, and The Egg. You can catch all of these programs under one umbrella at the Commons on our Facebook page. The Egg is presented by volunteer members of Tactical Civics. The views and opinions expressed are those of the individual contributors and do not necessarily reflect the official position of Tactical Civics. And tonight, we have Of Historical Importance with Martin Holtz, Tidewater versus Yankeedom. And this is going to be a very interesting program tonight, folks. So please stay with us. This program tonight will also lead into next Wednesday's program for Monumental. So please pay attention and listen carefully because we'll be talking a lot about the two. And tonight, before I introduce Martin, I'd like to share a couple of things. Martin was born in Chicago and at 6 months moved with his family to Harrisville, Pennsylvania until he was 19. He enlisted in the United States Air Force after a disastrous year in local college. He was in basic training when Woodstock and the first moon landing happened, his timing being impeccable. After serving nearly 4 years, he returned to Pennsylvania, finished college, and was commissioned via ROTC back into the United States Air Force as an officer. After retiring with 20 years of service in 1993, he worked for various private companies in the Middle East on government contracts for an aggregate for 10 years. He finally ended up in St. Louis and retired from Boeing in 2024. He grew up in a very conservative small church, full of his relatives who taught him scripture for which he is grateful. After life's vicissitudes drew him away several times, he finally rededicated his life to Jesus in 2001 and has lived for him since. His wife, getting saved, prompted his repentance and return to the way, and now the way leads him to Tactical Civics mission. And that mission has led him to the Egg. As an historian by training and by wide-ranging travel and study, he is dedicated to providing the history you were never taught. And with that, tonight, I'm going to let Martin Holtz take over and show us his presentation. Thank you, Martin.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Excuse me. And well, let's just get started here. Let me share my screen here a minute. I want to say too that our tech producer, Patriot Penny Stevens, is not here with us tonight. She has got pulled away today, and appreciate prayers for her and for her continued ability to maintain. She's just got so many irons in the fire, and right now she pulled herself away for today only, and I'm hosting, so we're going to be a little rough around the edges, probably tech-wise. Let me share my screen, and we'll get going, though. Tonight is week 4 of our continuing story on the settlement of the colonies that won the Revolution and established our republic and produced the Constitution. It's entitled Multiple Nations, as the principal structure and material about the peoples who immigrated to the New World is derived from the book American Nations by Colin Woodard, as I relate each meeting to give him his due. We're getting into more of the meat of our story now, and to begin, I want to give us an idea of where the colonies were coming, or where the colonists were coming from, the conditions in the home countries, and what motivated them to emigrate 3,000 miles across an ocean to a trackless wilderness. So we'll get started there. And also, I might add, before we really get started here, that I've got so much to cover here in a short period of time, so I'm just kind of planning to blast on through until we do our Q&A, unless there's something really important that comes up. And if so, put it in the chat, and one of our gatekeepers, Erin, or most likely will give me a flag and we can discuss it. But I'd rather just keep it all till the end, and then we can get through all this, I hope. So let me start. Here's a map of Europe in 1600. Notice the disarray. The countries of Italy, modern countries of Italy, Germany, Holland, Belgium, aren't anywhere to be seen. Neither is Great Britain, because it didn't exist at this point either. It was England alone. And England was fighting with the Scots and with the Irish petty kingdoms that you see depicted here, as well as since the Reformation, wars and counter wars had been going on in Central Europe, to the point where the Holy Roman Empire, which was what now is Germany and Austria, is really just fragmented into all these principalities and duchies that you see. France, one of the larger countries here, had only been organized under one king for a few years. They were, before that, a series of medieval duchies, and like the Duchy of Brittany and the Duchy of Normandy, and just recently had been the medieval processes and institutions had been broken down enough so that the mighty barons had all been brought into in a unified country of France. Same thing in Spain, though Spain had been reconstituted as a single entity, along with Portugal as a separate one, for about 100 years. But that's all. So all this was relatively new. In contrast, look at all the purple down south. The entire North African coast, almost the entire Mediterranean coast is Islamic. The purple is the Ottoman Empire. You can see that they are working their way up through Central Europe. The Muslim threat was very real and very extensive during this period of time, and that it had been for the last 300 years, really. There was pressure on Europe from the Muslims, and it's frequently lost. The main point here, though, is that there's wars going on everywhere. A lot of fragmentation and a lot of warring amongst principalities and powers due to the two happenings in the 15th century, which is the printing press and the Reformation. The Reformation's the 16th. So those two things have caused all this turmoil. Millions of people have been killed. In the 30 Years' War, from 1618 to 1648, they estimate something on the order of 2.5 million people killed. The 80 Years' War, which is basically the Dutch revolt against the Spanish Empire, actually went on for 80 years. And atrocities were rampant. I'll tell you what, people in Europe were not nice people, including our forebears, as we'll get into. Since medieval times, European countries had been ruled by one or another hierarchical form of government, with very few exceptions. Monarchies, duchies, baronies, oligarchical republics, the Roman Catholic Church. Lands in Europe were controlled by elites, by the noble classes, by the kings and the monarchs and the barons, and the lower classes had really no chance at all to rise in status or wealth or landholding. So tonight, we'll start the study of each of the colonies established along the eastern coast of what has become the USA. 5 of the 6 were built by people coming from one area, England, and after 1704, known as Great Britain, or the United Kingdom, which included Scotland and Ireland from then. The other one colony was initially settled by the Dutch, but was taken over by the English in 1664. As you can see from this map, New Netherland was the Dutch settlement. Yankeedom and Tidewater is who we're going to discuss today. And we're going to lay out the story of both quickly and kind of compare and contrast them. This order, we're studying these in the order of their initial establishment, but that order's sort of arbitrary because all these colonies were developing and growing simultaneously from that first development. So I will try to give some comparison snapshots of their progress relative to each other as we advance through the generations. This evening we'll look specifically, as I said, at Tidewater and Yankeedom. Not only were they established in that chronology, but they're the two most successful colonies in terms of numbers and prosperity at the time of the Revolution. And so therefore they were very influential on our Constitution and our subsequent country. But before we do that, I want to review a little bit and finish up the story of New France and Acadia, which I almost got through last week, or last presentation. So very quickly, here's the main traits and results of New France. And the thing that I really want to stress here is, and point out, is the French attitude toward the natives. It was a big differentiate, trying to think of the word. It was a big point of differentiation compared to other colonies, especially the ones settled by the English. And the French had an idea. The French concept of their leaders as they came to establish New France was that the Indians, the natives, were every bit as intelligent as human as themselves. They encouraged cross-cultural marriage. They encouraged fair and equal trade, cultural and economic. Their aim from the very first was to establish a co-equal society and colony with the Native Americans. They didn't want to displace them. They didn't want to kill them or enslave them. They wanted to embrace them, and they did. And French immigrants, as a result, became very acculturated to the native lifestyle. The main French attitude was co-equal and respected. Increasingly, Frenchmen went native. Here's a quote: "They spend their lives in the woods where there are no priests to restrain, nor fathers, nor governors to control them." That was one of the governors writing back to the French king. A lot of them went native, and that was an increasing trend. The French wanted to establish basically a medieval society with nobles and landed aristocrats and serfs working the land for them. And that's what they conceived of. It did not work out because the French hired indentured servants and brought them over to New France, and they just refused to become serfs. They wanted their own land. They saw it around there, and they also saw how the Indians lived, and they just went native. And it destroyed the plan, if you will. This is looking ahead a bit to 1660, but it reinforces the idea that the French had a tough time getting colonists to emigrate and live in their colonies. They had to they tried to set up the peasantry, and they tried to set up the landed aristocrats along the St. Lawrence River. And they had a very tough time getting people to emigrate. Here's some numbers. By 1660, all of Canada, all the area you see here, French area, only had 2,500 immigrants. This is in 1660. This is what? 3 generations after their first settlement. Louisiana, there are only 500 people in all of the large area of Louisiana. At the same time, New Netherlands, which also had trouble getting people to emigrate, had 7,500. New England had 35,000. Virginia had 30,000. Maryland and North Carolina was brand new. It was only a few years old and still had 2,000. My point is, the English hands down, the population race in the colonies, and that had an impact on everything. But it wasn't all that uniform either. And I'm going to pause here and show a video on the Acadians, which is this little portion of New France that was taken over by the English in 1713. And the Acadians were forcibly moved out of the British colony of Canada, and a good many of them ended up in central Louisiana, and we now call them Cajuns. So I'm going to give you a little video on them. All right, here we go.
Cajuns, Acadians, Acadiens. They were the descendants of the first European settlers in an area called l'Acadie, which is today eastern Canada. Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Cape Breton, all that. Now in the late 1600s, early 1700s, the Acadians found themselves caught in between two colonial empires in New England and New France. When the Acadians refused to sign an oath of allegiance to fight for the British king, New England and British regular troops would embark on what is known as the first recorded ethnic cleansing of people in North America. Between 1755 and 1785, half of the total Acadian population were killed by starvation, drowning, and violence. And during this forced relocation, thousands of Acadians made their way into Spanish Louisiana, and it was capped off in 1785 when Spanish King Carlos.Third sponsored 7 ships to take thousands of Acadians to Louisiana, with nearly all of them settling in the Lea.Fourth area, reuniting families and thus ending the decades-long trauma. Over the intervening years, Acadians have left an invaluable mark on not only a Louisiana culture, but American culture. Despite having been separated from their original North American homeland for centuries, Acadian identity has remained alive along Lea.Fourth and the prairies west of the Atchafalaya Basin. Withstanding cultural genocide, loss of the French language, hurricanes, civil war, oil spills, Bobby Jindal, and everything in between, Acadians are still here, making them a worldwide example of cultural resilience.
Okay. That was a neat little piece, and they were, the Cajuns have been so influential in our society that I just had to give that little spiel there. Looking ahead a little bit into the 1700s, but we're going to do that anyway here and there. All right, aspects of the immigration. 2/3 of the New France immigrants were single males, either very young or very old. And by 1699, 1/3 of the indentured servants that they imported had taken to the woods, and increasingly there were well-bred men following them. The landed aristocracy was going bankrupt because the peasants wouldn't stay there and be peasants. And it killed the feudalist society they were trying to set up. Population growth was very slow, comparably. And you can see the numbers here on that bottom thing. This whole trend about going native really started during the 80 years, even before the first settlements were established, because the French were trading with the Indians during that whole time period, as we talked about last time. There's also, this is the main reason the defense of the colony of New France by the 1700s was dependent almost solely on their Indian allies, because there were just too few French forces to effectively cover the vast areas involved. And here's the areas we're talking about. This is New France and El Norte about 1750. In 1750, our 13 colonies, our British colonies, occupied the East Coast and this small area, but there were 2.5 million of them by 1750. New France, by 1750, covered this entire blue area, and they had also settled or owned these purple areas which had just been given over to England in 1713. And in all these areas, there were about 70,000 French colonial inhabitants, covering all these forts, all these points, all this vast area. And I wanted to point something out here, and this is very interesting. The entire, or I should say, the charter for the state of Pennsylvania, which was granted to William Penn to satisfy a debt that Charles I owed his father. Just this area, to give you some idea of scale, is bigger than England. Pennsylvania is bigger than England. Gives you an idea of the scale of the land we're talking about here and why feudalism wasn't going to work anymore, because there was no one entity that was going to limit such an extent of land. Now, I wanted to point this out because by 1763, the French had lost all this, and it had gone either to the British or to the Spanish. In 1762, the French signed over their colony of Louisiana, which was all this land over here west of the Mississippi. They had signed it over to the Spanish, which is why he referenced Spanish Louisiana, where the Cajuns went to settle. So just keep that in mind for later on, because when the Constitution was written, when we constituted our republic, the British had supposedly turned over all this land east of the Mississippi to the Americans, but they hadn't vacated the forts. They were still here. And west of the Mississippi was all Spanish. And Florida was Spanish. So these two countries were going to affect us in the future. And that's all I wanted to point out here with New France. They did have a deep influence. And of course, I live in St. Louis, and St. Louis was totally French, even through the Spanish Louisiana time period when the official language was Spanish, but everybody in St. Louis still spoke French. Very interesting, and there's a lot of that influence here still. Okay, let's start. In 1606, James I granted a royal charter to a London-based company called the Virginia Company, and it was a corporation where investors bought shares on the relatively new Dutch model. And the idea was to raise private funds from investors to settle Virginia, which at the time was defined as the entire East Coast from New France up here the whole way to Florida, Spanish Florida. This was all Virginia. Two subordinate groups, or they called them companies, were chartered underneath the Virginia Company, or as part of the Virginia Company, to set up a competition to colonize Virginia. And they don't teach this, but the whole thing with Jamestown was a competition. So these two companies was a commercial enterprise, two charters for two colonies. And here is the setup. The Plymouth Company, or the Plymouth Group, had charter and rights to the coast between 38 and 45. So the green area between 38 and 45 north. And it was stipulated that their first colony would be in this unshared portion up here. And this is the colony they started. It was right here, and we'll get into that. It was called the Popham Colony from the leader. They had the rights to that coast. The London Company, or the London Group, had rights to the red area here. And their first colony was to be established within this lower pink area. And that was Jamestown, which is right here. And then whichever company was strong enough, that was the words in the charters. This overlapping area would actually go to whichever one of these groups was strong enough to colonize with another colony in this area after they got their two here started. So the Northern Group actually got the jump on them. They sent an attempt out in August of 1606, one ship, and the Spanish captured the ship somewhere off of Florida. I don't know why the heck he was down here when he was supposed to be up here. Who knows? But in August of 1607, they sent out another group. It was two ships, 120 men and boys. They left Plymouth on 31 May 1607, and their plan was to trade precious metals and furs and spices, with the natives, and also to show they had a specific goal to show that local timber could be used to build ships. And so they had prepared for that. They arrived off the coast or at the mouth of the Kennebec River in 1607, and they set up a colony called Fort St. George. And we know it as the Popham colony because of the leader of it. Now, in the meantime, the London Company, the London Group, sent out 3 ships that arrived in April of 1607 at the site of Jamestown. So we've got both these going on at the same time. The Popham colony was really well organized. There were 3 ships, there were 120 people. This is John Hunt's map from October of 1607, when they had established the colony and started to build this fort, and they had this plan. John Hunt was a draftsman on the colony register, and he did the map in October while they were starting the construction effort. Obviously, this is a very carefully thought out plan, and they had equipped themselves for it. This map is one evidence of that. The other evidence of that is they actually built a ship. And of course, that meant they had to bring the tools and the equipment along with the know-how and all the stuff to fit a ship. You know, the masts, the sails, the ropes, the ironwork. They brought all that with them, and they outfitted a 30-ton ship. They actually did that in the year and a half they were there. In December of 1607, the leadership actually did some foreplanning, and they returned half of the colonists because they had inadequate supplies to get them through the winter. Interesting concept, planning ahead. In February of 1608, their leader, who was called the president, George Popham, died. He was the nephew of Sir John Popham, who was the Lord Chief Justice of England at the time and their principal investor. So he had footed most of the bill. The colony's second command at the time, who was called an admiral, was Raleigh Gilbert. And Raleigh Gilbert was the young son of Sir Humphrey Gilbert, who had annexed and colonized Newfoundland, had previously colonized parts of Ireland, and he was involved in the Roanoke expeditions in the 1580s prior to the Popham colony. So he had a lot of experience in planting colonies and a lot of experience in the New World. His young son, Raleigh, was only 27 years old, and he was on this trip as the second in command. In February of 1608, George Popham, the president and the leader, died. It's interesting to note that that's the only death that they had that year that we know about. In May of 1608, a couple months later, came word of the death of Sir John Popham, the main investor. And then in September, another resupply ship brought word of the death of John Gilbert. John Gilbert was Sir Humphrey Gilbert's oldest son. Younger brother Raleigh, the leader of the colony, inherited everything that John left him. And so he decided to return for his inheritance. And they could not decide, and they could not find another leader. So they all decided that they would all abandon the colony and return because, number one, they didn't have a leader. Number two, they probably didn't have assurance that they were going to get resupplied when the investor has died, or the investors. And they had built the one ship. It's called the Virginia, which is one more point I wanted to make here before I flip slides. This map, John Hunt's map, was sent back to England, and it was stolen in 1608. It must have been stolen right after he got back there. It was stolen and sold to the Spanish ambassador to England, and he passed it to King Philip.Third of Spain in 1608. So they had good intel. They knew exactly what was going on. In 1888, this map was discovered in the Spanish General Archives and finally recognized. And it has been archaeologically proven to be very accurate, even though nowhere near all the known structures or the shown structures were actually built. They only had a year and a half. But what was shown on this map was actually laid out, and they have proven archaeologically where this fort was and that it was laid out. This map was very accurate. Okay. Here's some of the issues and resolutions, as I was just talking about. The Virginia, she seemed to be a very seaworthy ship because they used it to return a bunch of the colonists back to England. It survived a hurricane. She made at least one more Atlantic voyage to Jamestown that we know about. All right. So far as our story goes, this is the end of the Plymouth Company's endeavors. Next, we'll look at the London Company and their colony, which is Jamestown. And this is the permanent start to Tidewater. Oh, what a story. Okay, Colin Woodard in American Nations said that was poorly planned, badly led, and foolishly located. There were 104 people, 104 men on 3 ships, men and boys on 3 ships. Half were gentlemen adventurers from the London area, and half were beggars and vagrants from the London street and forced to go with them. The Virginia Company president later said, "The more damned crew hell never vomited." Nice endorsement of his own people. The really big problem was almost no one knew how to farm. They came to conquer and rule like conquistadors, like the Spanish. They fully expected to cow the Indians and the natives into providing for them. Didn't quite work out that way. Now I've got another video here I want to show to give you the real story. First I want to quote this from Woodard. He says, "In the traditional account of the Jamestown story, the dashing Captain John Smith leads a can-do party of adventurers as they hunt for gold, fight with savages, and seduce Indian princesses. They construct a fort, tough out the winters, and build the foundations of real American society, bold, scrappy, and individualistic. They came seeking a better life and created the New World's first representative assembly, harbinger of the great democracy to follow." Not a word about what really happened there.
Welcome to historic Jamestown, the site of the first permanent English settlement in North America. It was settled in 1607 by the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company was a group of investors hoping to invest in the New World to make a profit. They were granted a charter by King James.One, hence the name Jamestown. It was named after King James. While the settlers arrived with this really positive and optimistic idea of how things would go for them here at Jamestown, in actuality, what actually happened was a lot more tragic. And as I'll get to more later, just downright horrifying. The settlers arriving in 1607 came over on 3 ships, the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery. These were 104 men and boys. The first women would be brought over the following year. They chose this location for their settlement because it was defensible, which would protect against Spanish ships that may be going by, because the English weren't the first to come here from Western Europe. The Spanish had already come to the continent, and so the English wanted to protect themselves against them. And also the water here was deep enough for their ships to be able to dock very close to shore, so there was deep water anchorage. So it was a very convenient location for them. While it may have been convenient for them, as we know, when Europeans began settling here, it was already an inhabited continent. Jamestown was settled in the territory of the Powhatan Indians, a number of Eastern Algonquian-speaking tribes under the supreme rule of Chief Powhatan. Hostilities inevitably ensued between the settlers and the Powhatan Indians. Within 2 weeks of establishing Jamestown, the indigenous Virginia Indians attacked the settlement. Archaeologists believe they found one of the casualties of that event, a teenage boy buried with an arrowhead that was most likely the cause of his death. This led to the settlers constructing James Fort, a triangular enclosure of wooden palisades. So right along here, everywhere you see these recreated palisades, underneath that is where archaeologists discovered those original foundations. Perhaps the most famous story to come out of this time period was that of Pocahontas, the favorite daughter of Chief Powhatan, and her connection to John Smith. It's a story we've all heard, but one that I encourage you to do more research on. The popular narrative is rife with misinformation, and honestly, the real story is far more complex and interesting than the simplistic story. It was actually within this chapel that Pocahontas married John Rolfe, which is one of the most famous weddings or marriages in American history. I encourage you again to read about the circumstances of Pocahontas, her involvement with the colonists, etc. Back to 1607. That first year at Jamestown was disastrous for the settlers. Half of the original men and boys died within the first few months, not just from hostilities with the Virginia Indians, but also due to disease and starvation. Starvation would plague the settlers for years. The relationship between the settlers and the indigenous tribes was volatile, alternating between peaceful times and a mutually beneficial trade and a strained, deteriorating relationship. When 1609 rolls around, Jamestown's settlement is in extreme suffering. New supply ships have brought hundreds more settlers, and the settlers have continued to clash with the Virginia Indians. And then, in November of 1609, the Powhatan Indians lay a sort of siege to Jamestown, preventing anyone from leaving the fort to
Hi, this is William McNulty, head of mission of White Stork.
hunt or forage. In the winter of 1609 into 1610, the colonists entered something that is known as the starving time. It was full of disease and starvation. Something like 300 settlers crowded into this fort, and by the time of the following spring, only 60 had survived. What we know today, based on archaeological evidence and some contemporary accounts that have only been substantiated with archaeological evidence, is that at that time, colonists did resort to cannibalism. We know this because during an excavation they found in a kitchen-turned-trash pit the remains of animals, but also that of a young girl. She was about 14 years old, and on her skull they found shallow marks on the forehead and then deeper marks on the back of the head that are clear indications of someone trying to access the brain. And this would have happened really quickly after she died, because the brain doesn't exactly keep well after death. They don't think she was killed in order to be eaten. People were dying left and right at this time, so it would have been unnecessary. And in the 17th century, it wasn't that uncommon for animal brains to be found in recipes, so it's clear that this is what the intentions were. The person wielding the knife, the intentions were to access her brain. And it's also clear, based on the method of cutting, that this person was really hesitant, really unsure of what they were doing. As you can imagine, they must have been completely desperate at this time. Archaeologists have named this girl Jane. Her actual identity is unknown, but they've done a facial reconstruction based on her bones of what she could have looked like. When you think about it, it's almost unfathomable just the position that these people must have been in to resort to eating a 14-year-old girl. It was just a horrifying situation all around. It was horrifying for the settlers. It was also horrifying for the Virginia Indians. You know, eventually the settlers, whose previous ventures had all failed. I mean, Jamestown was a failing settlement until new supplies were brought over, plus seeds for tobacco. And once tobacco was planted, that turned into a major cash crop. And once that cash crop started blooming, they started expanding and, growing their territory and further encroaching on these native Virginia Indians. Jamestown remained active and expanding for decades longer, replete with more violent clashes with the local tribes, until 1699, when the capital was moved to Williamsburg. You can learn more.
Not a pretty picture. Lack of leadership is what I would say. Anybody that would, in a colony that was starving already, and allow 220 more people to offload when they had no time to plant, no time to get any more supplies. And they kept the supply ship there so they could load it up with mica because they thought it was gold for 3 months. And the crews on the ship ate up the provisions they did have, which led them to start eating each other, which is really sad. Okay, very quickly. 104 men and boys landed in the 3 ships in April, and they returned in the fall, and all 104 stayed there. 66 of them died. Pop them at the same time, 1 died because they had enough sense to send people back. John Smith shows up in the spring of 1608 in a relief ship. He was sent over just to be basically a captain, one of the officers of this military expedition, which is what it really turned out to be. The colonists, again, in the summer of 1608, spent the summer digging up mica, thinking it was gold and storing it on the ship rather than planting and growing crops. They convinced the resupply ship to delay, ate up all the provisions, still didn't have enough sense to send people back. And Smith then became the leader when the governor, the predecessor, died of typhus. They made him the leader. He was too strong for him. He made him go out and work in the field 6 hours a day. And his ruling was that those who don't work don't eat. And these gentlemen, that was intolerable to them. Smith only lasted 2 years before they deposed him. And he told people later that those people would rather starve than work. Smith also, after he had done a lot of exploring up the coast of what was now Massachusetts and environs, New York, in 1614 or 1615, Actually, in 1614, he was in Plymouth, the town of Plymouth. Patuxet was the Indian name. And Tisquantum, or better known as Squanto, was a kid about 12 or 14 years old at the time. So John Smith, who actually went to Patuxet to harvest sassafras and stayed there for several days, probably met Squanto, though it was never, documented. And then also later in 1615 or so, Smith blew a hole in his breast when he somehow set off an amulet of gunpowder that he had on a string around his neck, and he had to go back to England to get treatment. When he recovered from that, he wrote a book about all he had discovered, including maps of the coastlines he had explored along what became Massachusetts and the environments north and south. He showed the map to Prince Charles, who became King Charles I later, and asked him, probably brown-nosing, asked him to designate all the recorded Indian village on the with English names. No doubt, just to curry favor, and that's how Patuxet became Plymouth, Plimoth, because the Pilgrims had his maps. In fact, because they had John Smith's book and maps, they decided they didn't need to go to the extra expense of hiring him because they had everything he knew right there in the book. Bad mistake. So,
Martin?
1609 to 1610, this is the starving time. This is the second year. In the fall, 222 new colonists arrived. They were starving to death. Only 66 of them, only 38 of them made it through the first year. They bring 220 more in. The enterprise, the group, out there looking for a profit, brings in all these people. And the Indian attacks were so great that they were all huddled in the fort. And of course, the provisions ran out. And so they end up eating their horses, the rats, the cats, the snakes, their boots, the leather, whatever they could get. And then they started eating the dead. And that was the 14-year-old girl that was in the video. There is a documented story also of one man killing, salting, and eating his pregnant wife. Lovely. And Woodard says in American Nations, he says, these first Virginians proved to be such incompetent settlers because they hadn't come to the New World to farm and build a new society, but rather to conquer and rule, much as the Spanish had. The Virginia Company's founders expected their hirelings to act like the conquistadors, seizing control of the awestruck Indian kingdoms and putting their new subjects to work, mining gold and silver or slaving in the fields to feed their new masters. After all, the English had been following much the same program in Ireland, where the Gaelic-speaking savages toiled on English-owned plantations. Jamestown wasn't meant to feed itself, which is why it lacked farmers. It was, in essence, a corporate-owned military base, complete with fortifications, martial law, a small elite of officers, and a large contingent of rank-and-file soldiers. But it didn't quite work out the way they expected. I'm going to go through this quickly because I'm almost out of time and I haven't even got to the next group yet. John Smith was, Powhatan's Confederation had been built up on a lifetime. He was in his 60s when they showed up at Jamestown. He defeated rivals, then he would take them as sons in a ritual adoption ceremony, and then these groups would pay tribute to him for protection, and their tribe had a place in the whole Confederation, and therefore had safety in numbers. The Virginians were extorting corn from the Indians by force, and the Indians, there were 25 to 30,000 of them at that point, ambushed a raiding party, killed all 17 of them, stuffed their mouths with corn. John Smith then led another party to capture Powhatan, but they got ambushed and captured. And Smith was subjected to the adoption ritual. In other words, Powhatan was adopting him into the Confederation and expected due consideration for this. The mock adoption ritual, I should say, the adoption ritual is actually a mock execution that is interrupted by a person, in this case, the chief's 11-year-old daughter, Pocahontas, and then they performed the theatrical vassal ceremony, which took him as a son, so he becomes part of the family, so to speak. Well, this was completely misinterpreted by Smith. He claimed that the child was overwhelmed by his charm and begged to be spared, Now, you gotta understand this guy was really short and ugly, even by colonial standards. And he had so much wild, wiry red hair all over his face that the Indians thought he looked more like a beast than a man. And also, let's remember that deodorant wasn't invented until 1888, and the Europeans were way dirtier than the Indians by a long shot. Pocahontas, by the way, that wasn't a real name. That was a nickname, meant something like little wildcat, something like that. And it seems that the Indians, like the ancient Hebrews, didn't reveal actual names to untrusted strangers for fear of spiritual power over them. Just like the Hebrews, remember when Jacob wrestled with the angel all night, and they at the end of that particular activity, he said to the angel, he said, "What's your name?" And the Lord said, "What do you want to know my name for?" And didn't tell him. It's the same deal. All right. And there was just so much increased killing in Jamestown. It was just really tough. In 1610, the English wiped out an entire Indian village. They threw the children in the river and shot them for sport. Pocahontas was kidnapped in 1630. They married her off to a colonist. They sent her to England, where she died. By the way, she was married to John Rolfe. John Rolfe was instrumental in the salvation of the colony, as we'll see. 1622, the Indians, in retribution, launched surprise attacks at various places against the colonists. 347 English dead, which is a third of the colony's population at the time. Some were warned by friendly Indians. There would have been a lot more of them killed. Then, in 1623, the English offered a peace, invited all these people, 250, to a peace ceremony, and then poisoned all their drinks and killed them all. Really Christian bunch. Contrast this attitude toward the natives with that in New France. During this early period, the English were starving and eating each other. They wouldn't sample foods they didn't know, they weren't experienced with. At the same time, the French leaders in Port Royal were feasting on, quote, ducks, bustards, gray and white geese, partridges, larks, moose, caribou, beaver, otter, bear, rabbits, wildcats, raccoons, and other animals such as the savages caught, unquote, with the savages as equals in these big banquets at exactly the same time that they're eating each other in Jamestown. Okay. This is looking ahead also, but in reference to the last slide with all the killing, it went on, it went back and forth all up through the 1600s. By 1669, the Indian population was down to 2,000 because of all the killing. There were 25 to 30,000 of them in 1607. By 1669, there was 8% of them left. By contrast, just between 1607 and 1624, they brought in 7,200 colonists. They died in a 1-to-3 ratio, but 1,200 of them survived. And by 1669, the English population was 40,000. They were clearing and occupying more and more Indian lands, pushing the Indians more and more back or killing them. But now, to get back to 1614, the salvation of the colony was at hand when John Rolfe, Pocahontas' husband, successfully transplanted and harvested a mild West Indian tobacco strain and gave the colony a true cash crop. So two things changed the Tidewater society. One was tobacco, as you see here. They still needed a lot of workers. It needed a very labor-intensive workforce, unskilled, but a lot of labor to harvest it and prepare the tobacco. Initially, they recruited them from the laborers and vagabonds and unemployed and unskilled that were ghosting the streets in English cities, London in particular. The offer was transport to Virginia and a 50-acre plot of land after 3 years' service as an indentured servant. The respondees and also the ones that were kidnapped were mostly single men, aged 15 to 24. Very few were Africans as time went on, starting with 20 that were bought from the Dutch in 1619. Now, a little context on that. The Dutch were in the slave trade big time. They were transporting slaves from Africa to Brazil and from Africa to other colonies, the English colonies in Barbados, et cetera, et cetera. They were already using slaves. And one ship stopped by Virginia and said, "Hey, we can help you out with your labor concerns." That's how it got started. What was basically a corporate? Yes.
Martin, I'm sorry to stop you. Just to let you know, it's 8:47.
Yep.
You probably want to
I'm
start
gonna
Q&A
stop here.
soon, or okay.
I'm going to stop here in a couple of minutes, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. What was basically a corporate military garrison site with fortifications and officers, a few officers, and a great majority of common soldiers, military government, almost immediately transformed to a plantation society and structure. John Wolfe, who was a starving time survivor, had carried tobacco seeds from Bermuda in 1614. He successfully harvested the plantings, and the tobacco was much sweeter and much smoother than the Indian varieties native. So virtually overnight, the society turned from the military garrison to the plantations, and huge profits were starting to be made. Land for planting wasn't a problem at that time. By 1619, in 5 years, the new planter elite established the first representative government, the House of Burgesses. Initially, only Englishmen could vote, but the Polish artisans that the Jamestown people had, the company had migrated in to try and get some crafts going. They refused to work if they couldn't get the vote. Their first strike in the new land lasted 3 weeks, and they were voted. They were granted their voting rights, but the property requirements limited government to the landed planters. And last thing I wanted to say, indentured servants were quickly the majority in Tidewater's European population. Of 150,000 who emigrated in the 1600s, 80 to 90% of them were indentured servants. Most of them didn't survive their tenure. Mortality rate was like 30% a year. But those who did had a good chance of becoming independent farmers, and a few became very rich. And this is as far as we're going to get tonight. David, we're going to have to wait till next time to finish up with the Yankees and then compare and contrast them. I'm going to stop my shares here, and we got a few minutes to do a little talking.
And you already have a hand up from Johnny
Yep.
B.
Johnny B, your hand's up. Go for it.
Hey, Martin. Do you have any idea how many of the immigrants actually got their grub stake at the end of the 3 years? Your information didn't reveal that.
I don't have any statistics on that, but it is known that some number survived, got their 50 acres, got their tools, and the ones that did had a fair chance to become an independent farmer, and several of them became very rich, became planters.
Yeah, I noticed you mentioned that right there at the end, but just a thought I had, do we know of any successful indentured servants?
Oh, yes, we do. And in fact, we even know of some successful black indentured servants. There was one guy, I'm trying to remember his name. I've got it in here. I'd have to look it up. He was a black indentured servant. I might add, too, that the indentured servants, the first black indentured servants, starting out with those 20 in 1619, were treated like indentured servants. They were not treated as slaves. And they were given their freedom after their 3 years. And there were a lot of free blacks, relatively speaking, early on in Virginia and Tidewater. And there was no segregation. The indentured servants, the blacks and the whites, lived together and served together, etc. It's only later that things hardened up on them due to influence from the South Carolina and the Barbados black plantation owners there, which really dialed in the racial permanent slavery. At any rate, this one black indentured servant in 1640 or in the 1630s, this man who had been an indentured servant and a black man owned 250 acres and several black servants. The sad part of it is that a couple of generations later, his descendants all fled the colony because of the increasing encroachments on their rights and privileges and increasing fear of being re-enslaved, actually. It was a real shame. but there are some instances of that happening. In Tidewater, slavery was never as harsh as it was in South Carolina, because South Carolina slavery, as we'll see, came from Barbados. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, when some of the French, when they escaped from the English, they came across the St. John River into northern Maine. And the Micmacs worked with them to save them. Mm-hmm. It was really something. And when I was playing soccer, or as they call it, football, in for the University of Maine at Fort Kent, Frenchmen would come and watch us play. And afterward, I would get to speak with some of them. And they would share history that nobody knows. Like, you know, how the Indians, how the Native Americans there were willing to work with them.
Yeah.
And that's where the Allagash Indians were also peaceful. And that became the logging center. I mean, you know, everyone in the colonies, when they wanted wood,
right,
they would get it from the Allagash area.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's still a lumbering area.
Yeah. Hey, we'll talk some more about that next time, because we'll be talking about Yankeedom. And there is a lot of interaction between Yankeedom and Acadia, a lot of it. And they supported each other. In fact, they tried to get the Acadians in Nova Scotia to revolt against the British, you know, and become the 14th colony, but they wouldn't do it.
Well, you know, Nova Scotia, it's Latin for New Scotland.
Yeah. And they still speak some Scottish up there too.
They do.
Well, we're getting a little off the subject for tonight, but I really wanted to get there. Any other questions? Any other comments? I do want to.
Thank you much, Martin, for a wonderful evening. Great opportunity to learn what we need to learn.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. I really want to and intend to do a compare and contrast between the Tidewater Society and the Yankee Society, because it just points all this stuff out. And oh, by the way, I might add, and as kind of a lead-in, and Erin's going to talk about this too, but this is just, Yankeedom in particular is just the subject of the monument. And the monument reflects mostly the Yankee approach, but not all. So it's a neat thing. And Erin, I'll turn it over to you to finish it up.
Thank you, Martin. Next week on our monumental series, we are going to be covering the Chain of Liberty. And we're going to start, basically what Stephen McDowell is going to be doing is starting from creation and moving on. And we'll be going up through history to Yankeedom and understanding all of the colonies that settled here in this country. So it's a little bit more on the information from a slightly different perspective, but it sure is going to be interesting. I really encourage everybody to show up. You're going to enjoy the video as always. We're starting the second half of our series next week. Thank you everybody for joining us on the Egg this Wednesday evening. We really appreciate all of you. We love seeing all of you here. You're just all good eggs to us. So thank you very much. Have a great evening, everybody.
We stand on sacred ground, built on faith and truth. Our fathers paved the way with honor and with proof. By His grace we rise, united in our fight. To guard our promised land, we will shine the light. Jesus reigns above, guiding every hand. We keep the flame alive across this blessed land. One county at a time, we raise our voices strong. With Constitution firm, we right what's been wrong. In town halls we reconvene, hearts ready to defend, built on scripture's beam. Our mission won't relent, responsible and just, we answer to his call. Hand in hand we trust, and never shall we fall. Just half of 1%, united we advance. Chapters rise in towns and cities, seizing every chance. Across our proud republic, our banners call the name. Join our mission now, restore our founder's flame. From mountains to the coast, our message marches on. Steadfast in our duty, focused on God's Son. A spark in every county, a flame that won't resign. Together we prevail, in purpose we align. Oh, rise up, oh faithful ones, let freedom ring anew. Stand firm in righteous love in all that we pursue. Jesus reigns above, God in every hand. We keep the flame alive across this blessed land. One county at a time, we raise our voices strong. With Constitution firm, we right what's been wrong. We march in faith and hope till his kingdom stands. Tactical and true, we guard these holy lands. Chapters build the future through every state and hall. Join tactical civics, answer freedom's call.
All right. Thanks for coming, guys.
Have a great evening. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Bye, guys.